For me, the dollar is over. The fiat bargain broke down. Show me what you've done with your portfolio, with your bonds, with your stocks over the last 5 years, and how has it outperformed Bitcoin? Have fun staying poor. This is just a better technology for money. And your technology for money is a broken technology that is optimized for your government to steal from you. It's optimized for the government to be able to finance its operation. You start printing money to fix the consequences of money printing. This is the kind of mentality that you get into.
It takes maybe someone like you to step back and say, wait a second, maybe none of this is true. You wrote Bitcoin Standard in 18, way before COVID printing, way before inflation skyrocketing. You were calling this years before that.
If you don't want Bitcoin, if you don't agree with Bitcoin, if you don't like Bitcoin, continue to use your local government's scam money, continue to hold government bonds, continue to get wiped out, put your money in banks that go under, and enjoy poverty. If you look at it realistically, all currencies are in hyperinflation at slow motion. In the long run, Bitcoin is the short on all of those currencies. And you know that there's not going to be more than 21 million, and you know that nobody can make more of it, and you know nobody can take away your coins. So then that means you can go and live your life. Do a productive thing for society, spend less than you earn, save the rest in Bitcoin, and live your life.
The world is changing. Inspiration is everywhere. It has never been so easy to connect, share, and bring people together. We're learning from others and finding the best in ourselves. Challenging our beliefs. Sharing our vulnerability. Overcoming our fears. Transforming ourselves so we can transform the world. How far can we go?
This is London Real. I am Brian Rose. My guest today is... This is London Real. I am Brian Rose. My guest today is Saifedean Ammous, the entrepreneur, economist, and author. You were the professor of economics at the Lebanese American University for 10 years before you began teaching the economics of Bitcoin in the Austrian school tradition. In 2018, you wrote the best-selling book, The Bitcoin Standard, The Decentralized Alternative to Central Banking, and in 2021, The Fiat Standard, The Debt Slavery Alternative to Human Civilization. You've recently been named as economic advisor to El Salvador's Bitcoin office by President Nayib Bukele, and you are the host of the hugely popular podcast, The Bitcoin Standard. Your latest book, Principles of Economics, explores in detail how human civilization depends on capitalism. You believe that Bitcoin is a tool for freedom that acts as a form of protest against the predatory policies of governments and central banks. Saifedean, welcome to London Real.
Thank you so much for having me, Brian. That introduction basically says everything. Thank you.
Fantastic. Really excited to have you on and go deep on these. You know, we've talked to a lot of people over the last couple of years, you know, deep into Bitcoin, and it feels like you're kind of the missing piece. So it's going to be great to hear. I saw pictures of you at Bitcoin Miami hanging out with Mr. Saylor and a bunch of the other people that have been on the show. And I really like a bunch of the things that you say. I wanted to kick off and just say this appointment to El Salvador, you know, can you tell me what it means to you and what El Salvador is doing that the world should understand? That's kind of what I'm curious if you could explain to people.
Yeah, so in the Bitcoin Standard, I make the case for Bitcoin as a monetary asset. And I think a lot of the early analysis of Bitcoin was focused on understanding Bitcoin as a payment network. So people thought Bitcoin is here to replace Visa, MasterCard, Western Union, PayPal, these kind of essentially payment technologies. And the argument that I make in the Bitcoin Standard is that Bitcoin is not competing with these things in as much as it is competing with the underlying monetary assets that can be run on these things. In other words, you could actually have Visa, MasterCard, PayPal, and Western Union use Bitcoin. They are not competitors. They are orthogonal to each other. Bitcoin is out there competing with the currencies of central banks and with the payment rails of central banks for final settlement. And the other aspect, of course, is that Bitcoin is competing with national currencies and national bonds as the asset that people hold for saving. So historically, people used to use gold for saving. Then they used to use gold-backed currencies. Gold-backed currencies became highly inflationary, and the alternative is bonds. And people thought that, bonds offer a yield that allows you to beat inflation. But I think recently this has become pretty difficult to achieve because bonds yields don't beat inflation in real terms. And so I think Bitcoin offers an excellent alternative to that because it is an asset that is strictly scarce. In other words, there's no ability for anybody to make more than the 21 million that will only ever exist. And so therefore, it's something that resists debasement. And I argue that in the long run, you're likely to be much better off just holding Bitcoin without a yield than holding government debts, even with yield, because, governments obviously, they finance themselves from that spending. So they're going to get it from you. You are the product, effectively. You are what's being monetized when you hold their bonds. So El Salvador's decision to make Bitcoin a part of its treasury, to hold Bitcoin, is what I find the most interesting and most important aspect of it, because I think the long-term effect of this, I would argue, and I expect, is that over time, this is going to turn out a much better decision than holding on to government bonds, but holding on to US treasuries and other governments' bonds, which is what central banks usually hold on to. So I'm extremely excited about this experiment, and I've been following it closely for the 2 years that it's been going on. And so recently I got invited by Max and Stacy. You know them, our common friends, the legends. They're working with the Bitcoin office in El Salvador. They invited me to go there and give a lecture to young El Salvadorians who are working on developing their skills as Bitcoin programmers. So I gave a lecture, and I also had the pleasure of meeting President Nayib Bukele. And they offered me the chance to work with the Bitcoin office to be an economic advisor for them. So, and I, of course, jumped on the opportunity because it's watching my ideas come into life is an extremely exciting thing, and I'm really looking forward to it. And I think, El Salvador is an extremely exciting country at this point. It's astonishing what this president has achieved. He's got something like 92% approval rating, because primarily not because of Bitcoin, I would say. Bitcoin's effect is still barely felt in the country, and I think it's a much more of a long-term play. But he's managed to fight a war against the gangs, and you hear about wars against gangs, but usually these things are turned into intractable, bloody affairs. But it was an incredible, decisive victory, and the result is that El Salvador now is one of the safest countries in North and South America, in all of the Americas, and it's truly exciting, and it's amazing when you go there. People would not leave their homes. People had no social lives. People could not walk in the street. The downtown was a war zone, deserted place where people wouldn't want to venture at night. And now people walk around, people have their kids out. Somebody was telling Max that they have a problem now, which is that their house is too big. Back in the days of the gangs, everybody was always stuck at home, and now everybody's always out enjoying the weather in the mountains and the beaches of this amazingly beautiful country. And so it's a really exciting time to be there. And I'm really looking forward to working and trying to help them out with their Bitcoin policy.
Yeah, that's an amazing success, and those gangs down there are no joke. So the fact that he's had that success is incredible. And if you've ever gone to a place like Dubai, you can see how much the citizens and the visitors there, they cherish. I mean, the thing about Dubai is that everybody who visits there it feels like they're employed by the tourism board, because they all tell you how safe it is, and you can plug your mobile phone in and no one's going to steal it a day later, and which is all true. And it makes it just a nice place to be, good for families. And look, I was at Consensus in Austin, Texas, and I can't say walking downtown there was the safest place in the world. So you make a good point.
Yeah.
Maybe it's safer than even places in North America these days. So no, that's exciting. And to watch, a president, really enacting out some policies and economics that you talked about in the book is that's pretty surreal, isn't it? It's like maybe we are living in a simulation after all for you to be working there. So that's excellent. Yeah, 10 years ago, Max Kaiser came on my show to talk about Bitcoin. And it was weird because at the time we were always looking to talk about the latest issue and Bitcoin was on the mind and I didn't know who to talk to. So I asked Twitter and they all pointed me to Kaiser and I wasn't quite sure. So we kind of got into a little war on Twitter and then he just showed up to my studio and I didn't know if we were going to get into a fight or what, but I ended up becoming good friends with Max and Stacy and got my first Bitcoin at like, $80, $89 or $100 at the time. And it's fascinating to look back on those interviews now and just to see, how far we come. And I guess maybe how far we have to go to a certain extent. You wrote Bitcoin Standard in 2018, way before COVID printing, way before inflation skyrocketing. What's that been like for you to watch this take place in real time? Because, Michael Saylor is the first one to admit that it took the COVID money printing for him to finally get it. You were calling this years before that. What's that whole experience been like? And do you get a lot of people now that really come up to you and thank you for being an early adopter of this mindset?
Yeah, I think from where I stood, COVID was not such a unique departure from business as usual. This is what was going on before. So in the Bitcoin Standard, I look at the money supply growth over the period from 1960 to 2021. The Fiat Standard, I run the data set up until 2020. And you find that the average national currency or the total of all national fiat currencies has grown at around an average of 14% per year over 60 years, which is a very high supply growth rate. The best currencies, the best run currencies with the most responsible central banks achieved something like 7 or 8% annual growth average. So Switzerland, the US, Sweden, and Denmark, I think, are the 4 top countries, and their annual supply growth rate is about 7-8%. So every year you're increasing the supply of money by 7 and 8%. Now, most people are told, well, you buy bonds and then you invest in stocks and you're able to beat inflation. And up until 2020, that was kind of a tenable lie because inflation was given as CPI, and CPI is, I believe, a completely broken metric. It's not wrong. It's invalid. And if I were to summarize, the problem with it is you measure with CPI, you try and measure in price inflation based on people's expenditures. But of course, people's expenditures themselves are determined by inflation, by the purchasing power of their money. So it's a circular way of measuring things. It's like an infinite loop in Excel where you're referring one cell to the other. So the problem basically is if your money is devalued, you can't just increase your spending. People's expenditure doesn't go up to match the devaluation because they don't have enough money to spend it. So let's say if you're buying beef every day, and this is and let's say you pay $10 for the beef that you buy every day, and then there's a ton of money printing, and then the price of beef doubles. Well, when the price of beef doubles, your income is not going to double immediately. So you're still earning the $10 that you were going to spend on buying the beef. But now you can't buy beef because beef has doubled in price. So what do? You have to make do with cheaper substitutes, soy or some other inferior substitutes, and you still spend the $10. So the basket of goods has not, the amount of money that you spent has not changed. And so for the last 50 years, since 1970, we've had this phenomenon where people have been substituting cheaper substitutes for the things that they want. And I argue in the Fiat Standard in more detail, I get into it, that, a lot of the pseudosciences that we see promoted in modern universities that tell you fossil fuels are going to burn the planet and eating meat is bad for you. I argue, and I provide, I believe, a pretty compelling case in detail, that what motivates that, obviously all of that science is government funded, and what motivates that is to try and get people to accept that, the reason that you're substituting soy for beef in your basket of goods is not that you can no longer afford beef. It's because beef is destroying the planet and it's bad for you, and that soy somehow is better for you. And so we are constantly being forced to substitute cheaper alternatives, and that makes the CPI look better. That makes the CPI look much better than it is. It looks like we only have 2-3% inflation per year. Well, it's not true. It's only 2-3% because people can't afford to buy the same things that they were able to afford to buy earlier. And of course, another aspect that goes into the CPI is that technological innovation somehow brings down inflation. So if they print a ton of money, prices of things go down, but your computer gets faster, then the CPI is adjusted to say, well, you can now buy more processing power with your computer, with your money. So therefore, that's eating up the inflation. So effectively, we've always had inflation, and I think it was possible to cover it up until COVID. And for the majority of people, it seemed like it was acceptable because you got a little bit of a good yield on your treasuries. You made a good return on your stocks. Occasionally, of course, you got wiped out. There was a default. The government that you lent money to would default and you would get wiped out, or the stocks you bought would get wiped out and companies would go bankrupt. So there was an element of casino and you can't save properly. But the idea that inflation was the problem was pretty much under control for most people. Most people imagine that inflation was under control. But yeah, 2020 is when it became impossible to hide because the amount of money printing, and this is just the normal course of events. If you look historically, money printing is like an addiction. It's like a drug where you start off with low doses and then you need a much bigger dose every time. And so you keep upping the dose over and over and over again. And it's very hard to quit. It's very hard to stop at a low dose. And so it's natural that money printing was going to continue to escalate because once you get into the mindset, which is essentially what universities teach, which is that money printing fixes things, then you get into the extremely dangerous dynamic of money printing causes problems, and then your economists, the government paid economists, are paid essentially to always conclude that money printing is what fixes things. So you start printing money to fix the consequences of money printing. And this is really the inevitable outcome. So if you look at hyperinflation in Zimbabwe, I remember there was the central banker of Zimbabwe was talking about how, he was boasting about the fact that we're out there and we're able to provide the market with all the money it needs to fight hyperinflation and to prevent economic collapse. This is the kind of mentality that you get into. And I think Zimbabwe, for most Westerners, they like to think of Zimbabwe as just, it's a backwards African country. I think Zimbabwe is just a much more advanced economy than the US. They are way ahead in the logic of this. They're taking the logic of the Fiat system to its natural conclusion. So 2020, you had this massive problem, required a lot of money printing. And that, of course, led to a decline in interest rates. So yields on government bonds essentially went to zero and went negative. And people became well aware of the fact that, you can't beat inflation. And that's what I believe drove a lot of people to Bitcoin around 2020. Michael Saylor is one of those people. He talks about how up until 2019, it was feasible that you could, or, maybe 2015, 2016 or so, it was feasible that you could save by buying a bond and then live off of the bond. You could retire by buying bonds and then just live off of the yield. And but then when the yield disappeared, inflation keeps going up, prices keep rising, and you have to start eating into your principal, and you can't live off the yield anymore. So that kind of the fiat bargain broke down in 2020, and I think it's been breaking down further since then. They've raised interest rates, but I don't think it's still enough to beat inflation.
Yeah, one of the beautiful things about Bitcoin, and I had Jeff Booth on talking about this as well, is that for the first time ever, it's like this parallel universe, like those old Star Trek episodes where you can actually really see, as Jeff would say, everything priced in Bitcoin in the future, it's lower, it's deflationary. And yet in dollars, it's inflationary. And yet we were all taught these things. I was taught this in economics at MIT. And when I got to Wall Street, they said, oh, this is what the Fed does, and this is why it does it. And you just kind of accept it as fact, right? Just like the kids these days
probably can't all be wrong.
Right, yeah. Just like probably the kids at school, accept the fact of climate change is caused by this and the meat eating and the And so, but it takes maybe someone like you to step back and say, well, wait a second, maybe none of this is true. And it's great to have Bitcoin as a practical parallel universe where you can actually see how in this world it's actually weirdly doesn't have to be that way. And then when Jeff starts saying things like, well, look, technology should make everything cheaper in the future, a lot cheaper. Look at your iPhone and et cetera. It's a great way to look at this. I'd say more and more people are opening their eyes, but I would just say still probably the majority of the public is still not aware about their money. And if you're in a lower income or maybe a lower educated population, you still think that the government sending you checks is the best and only way out.
Absolutely. I think, but the beautiful thing about Bitcoin, as you said, is that it's a parallel universe and it's just out there. And it makes it, for me, the good thing about it is that we no longer need to convince people. So I used to believe those things before I got into Bitcoin. And 2014, 2015, I was a gold bug. I thought gold was the answer. And I was going around trying to tell people that, the Fed is doing something bad and inflation is bad. You don't need inflation. We don't need to print more money to get richer. If you print more tickets to a football stadium, you can't increase the capacity of the football stadium. You have to actually build it. And all of these things before Bitcoin, they fell on deaf ears because, all right, so what is the actionable conclusion of this? If I try to tell this to somebody and I convince them, well, the answer is, all right, well, vote for somebody who's going to reinstate the gold standard. And that's just a completely dead end. It's impossible, perhaps not impossible, but it's very difficult to imagine the democratic process which gives the winner, the money printer, being won by somebody who's going to not use the money printer. I mean, it's really like imagining the 100-meter race being won by somebody who's got their legs tied up, because the way you win elections is you make promises about what you're going to do with the money printer. This is political and economic debates in the 20th century are all about how I'm going to print money and give it to the right causes, whereas you are going to print money and give it to the bad causes. I'm gonna destroy the currency to give it to give everybody healthcare and pink unicorns, whereas you are going to do irresponsible things. And at the end of the day, of course, as we saw with the whole debt ceiling kerfuffle over the last couple of weeks in the US, at the end of the day, they reach a historic compromise where they agree that, all right, well, you get to print for your thing, I get to print for my thing. And, we both bravely destroy the currency together. And of course, in the context of the US, the Republicans want to print to invade other countries and enrich the military industrial complex. The Democrats want to print to buy votes domestically. And but eventually there's always enough money to go around because it's a money printer and there's no opportunity cost. And that's the key essential concept that I try and explain in the Fiat standard, that government money destroys the concept of opportunity cost in politics. And so it's very difficult to get the political process to produce somebody who's going to say, we're not going to destroy the currency, we're going to protect the currency. And that's going to result in, something that can vindicate the ideas that I have. So up until Bitcoin comes about, it's a very lonely, desperate struggle. And then Bitcoin comes about, and you no longer need to convince people. And as a lot of Bitcoiners on Twitter like to say, have fun staying poor. If you don't want Bitcoin, if you don't agree with Bitcoin, if you don't like Bitcoin, continue to use your local government's scam money, continue to hold government bonds, continue to get wiped out, put your money in banks that go under, put your money in the fractional reserve Ponzi schemes, and enjoy poverty. That's really the only working alternative to Bitcoin, as I like to call it, is poverty. The only working alternative to Bitcoin is that you're going to have your money destroyed by a government that can print it. And we no longer need to convince people of this anymore, because now Bitcoin does the talking for us. Bitcoin today, of course, for the Bitcoin haters, Bitcoin's always crashing because it's always not, or for the vast majority of its life, it's not close to its all-time high. And so they're always looking from the bottom, from the top down, and saying, well, it was a 69 and now it's a 27, so it's failed. Yeah, but it was a 69 for few days that it was in the 60s and 50s and 40s for a few months. But for the 14 years of its existence, the vast majority of the 14 years of its existence, it was way under 27,000. So for the vast majority of people who had bought Bitcoin at any point, they've done much better than any other alternative. So if you look at any kind of time frame that's longer than 3-4 years, basically Bitcoin outperforms pretty much everything. Some exceptions and some points, like at the later part of last year when it was down over 4 years or so. But for the vast majority of its life, over a 5-year period, it's outperformed pretty much everything. And so even when people are gloating about how Bitcoin's down, the bubble has burst, the dream is over, and they're laughing at Bitcoiners, all you got to do is just show me what you've done with your portfolio, with your bonds, with your stocks over the last 5 years, and how has it outperformed Bitcoin? And of course, it's not just that they haven't outperformed Bitcoin, it's that they haven't outperformed Bitcoin while essentially doing nothing with their life but trying to outperform inflation. So you're on CNBC every day, you're reading books and reading articles and paying subscription to newsletters and hiring experts and hiring fund managers and following all the latest fads and trying to develop an investment thesis and investing in all kinds of different companies and jumping around from one to the other and following fundamentals, but also following technical analysis. It's a full-time job, and it's a full-time job that, people with PhDs in economics and giant supercomputers do and still can't beat Bitcoin. And so, what hope does the average dentist or doctor or athlete or engineer have? Basically, it's very, very, very difficult. And I think it's just what I try and express in my book is that this is just a better technology for money. Like your technology for money is a broken technology that is optimized for your government to steal from you. It's optimized for the government to be able to finance its operation. That's why we have a central bank. The central bank is not there to help you have money. We've had money without central banks, so we can have money without monopoly central banks. It's entirely possible to have a free market monetary system on any form of money. And the free market will choose money on its own. Gold was not chosen as money because governments passed laws saying gold needs to be money. Gold was chosen as money before all of the world's current existing governments existed. And all of the governments that chose gold as money chose it because it was money and it was chosen by the market. And if they wanted to operate as governments, if they wanted to operate, they needed to acknowledge the market's choice. So it's the market that determines what money is. And the market is perfectly capable of providing money. And the 20th century in the Fiat standard, which I discussed in my second book, it was just this complete destruction of the concept of money by turning it from an output of the free market into essentially a government cartel for governments and banks to operate this thing in a way that is optimized for them to finance their operation at the expense of the users, unfortunately.
How much longer do you think the dollar has left, honestly?
I don't know. I don't have a crystal ball. I don't believe as an economist from the Austrian school. I don't believe you can make quantitative predictions in economics because ultimately economics is about human action, and it's not possible to just predict how humans react to stimuli. Humans are not physical objects. So if you throw a ball of a certain weight with a certain speed, you can make a very accurate prediction about how far it'll travel and where it'll land and so on. You can't do that with humans acting. So I don't really have a crystal ball to tell me that. But I think, to paraphrase John Lennon, the dollar is over if you want it to be. For me, the dollar is over. It doesn't matter anymore, whatever happens with the dollar. And I think, I used to live in Lebanon when the hyperinflation happened. And because of Bitcoin, didn't matter to me when the Lebanese currency's Ponzi scheme blew up. People think, places like Lebanon and Zimbabwe are just exceptional places, exceptionally corrupt governments that have destroyed their currencies. I think it's an extremely common thing. If you look at it realistically, all currencies are in hyperinflation at slow motion. They're all losing value. And, obviously there's a lot of money to be made if you can predict those things. Like if you knew when the Lebanese currency was going to collapse, then yeah, you could have taken out a big giant loan in the Lebanese lira and used it to buy hard assets and then paid it off at very cheap price. So there is perhaps an art and a science to trying to predict the mortality of national currencies. But I prefer to live my life and just hold Bitcoin because you end up doing it much better. I think, you may be right, you may be wrong when you're trying to time these things, but in the long run, Bitcoin is the short on all of those currencies. And in the long run, Bitcoin's scarcity is just going to enforce itself. So for me, one of the real appeals to it is the fact that once you buy Bitcoin, you're just you're trusting in the software. When you're not really trusting, you're verifying, and you run the software on your computer. You can see the code, and you know that there's not going to be more than 21 million, and you know that nobody can make more of it, and you know nobody can take away your coins. So then that means you can go and live your life. You can go and be productive, write a books, be a doctor, be an engineer, paint people's houses, drive a cab, whatever it is. Do a productive thing for society. Spend less than you earn, save the rest in Bitcoin, and live your life. And this is what it was like under the gold standard before everybody had to be a part-time fund manager in order to be able to keep the wealth that they've earned. As I say this is the fiat standard, under the fiat monetary system, you have to earn your money twice. Once when you work for it, and then once when you take it to the fiat capital market casino and try and win it. It's like we work it's just like you work at a factory and then you're not allowed to take your pay home from the factory. You've worked all day, but before you go home, you have to go to the factory's casino, gamble your money, and hope that you make more. And some people can get wiped out, and some people can lose all of the work that they do. This is sort of what it is like in the fiat world. And honestly, I pity people like this. Like I see them on Twitter. I see the financial analysts on Twitter, like having nervous breakdowns over what the Fed is going to do, and is the Fed going to do this, and what's the Bank of Japan going to do? And really, it's insane to imagine that your own family's well-being, your own wealth, the money that you've already worked for, can be taken away from you if you guess incorrectly what the Fed or the Japanese central bank or some geopolitical thing. If you think Russia is not going to invade Ukraine and then they do, your portfolio could get wiped out. Everything that you've worked for all of your life could be lost, and that's because you're essentially for your money, you're using casino chips. You're using casino chips, and the only way that you can spend that money is to have to go through the blackjack table, and you have to go through the roulette, and you have to go through all of those games, and you have to master all of those games. It's like an obstacle course to try and keep your money, and because it is optimized to take your money away from you. And Bitcoin fixes all of that. That's for me the appeal here, because look, there's 21 million, and if you have one of those 21 million, that's it. You're always going to have 1 out of 21 million of all the coins. And you don't have to worry about somebody taking it away from you. You don't have to worry about somebody devaluing it by printing more of it. That's what it ultimately comes down to.
That's a great explanation. I've never heard about that, where you got to pass through the casino on your way out from work. But it's really well said. And like you said, these days, you really have to be an expert in finance to even have a chance of keeping your money. And if you look at the probability spectrum, a lot of people don't. And some people make it out just with the money they have or a little less. And, some make some money depending on what number they put it on, I guess you would say. I want to ask you about this big statement in your latest book where you say that civilization depends on capitalism. You're going to make a lot of enemies at universities. My daughter just started at university in America, and she just came back, and I said, is this Marxism thing? Is that like a thing there? And she's like, oh yeah, it's a thing. People are celebrating Lenin. And I'm like, but what about the 20, 30, 40 million people that died? And she's like, no, it's a real thing there. And I was like, wow, that's flabbergasting to me. Tell me about this assertion, and why are there people in America having conversations that a non-capitalistic system might be right?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think universities are increasingly irrelevant to the real world. They're places where people sell credentials, and it's essentially the education there is becoming increasingly unhinged and detached from reality. So It doesn't really matter what people say at universities. All these professors have these amazing titles and these amazing jobs, but
our future leaders are going there. Many of them. I know some aren't, but many of them are, right?
I don't think so. I think it's more of a it's more of a propaganda idea that the leaders are going there. If you look at a lot of the people that have shaped the world around us today, they did not finish university, or they did not even go to university. In particular, you look at the most important entrepreneurs of the last 10, 20 years, the people that have built the most incredible, most successful products. So just off the top of my head, the Google guys, Mark Zuckerberg. Well, I think he dropped out of Harvard.
Dropped out of Harvard, yeah.
Sure. Yeah. So just a very large number of people who didn't finish college and ended up doing enormously well. And I think that's going to just continue to accelerate, because college is becoming increasingly irrelevant. And this is why I left my job at the university, because first of all, you look at academic publications. Nobody reads academic publications. Nobody should read academic publications. They're completely unreadable. It's essentially making people jump through hoops to just write things that are politically correct, grammatically correct, and running through the correct methodology of whatever field and discipline exists, and then rewarding them with a job. That's it. I mean, the function of academia is not to inform students or teach students. It's to provide jobs for academics. And you get that job by essentially promoting the right narrative, by going along with the narrative that people want to hear, which is, not people want to hear, but that government's finance. Ultimately, whoever pays the piper calls the tune. And universities are primarily paid by governments. And I discussed this in depth in the Fiat standards. There's a couple of chapters on what I call Fiat education and Fiat science. It's Fiat science because it is financed by Fiat. So, you can't be a university today. You can't be considered a reputable expert by being a university unless you're getting government funding, government research grants, and most importantly, subsidized student loans. That's the real way that that universities are beholden to governments. If you are a university that doesn't toe the correct line, well, then your students don't get to take out low interest rate loans to get into it. So the entire thing is financed by government, and it is run to the benefit of government. So it comes up with the conclusions the governments want to hear. And that conclusion, of course, is that governments need to be spending more money, need to be printing more money, and that you need to be spending less money, and that you need to be buying cheaper things, and that it is better for you to eat industrial waste than real food. All the food that your ancestors have eaten for thousands of years is bad for you, but the modern industrial waste is what's good for you. That all the oils, all the fuels that have given us industrialization and taken us from darkness and doubled our life expectancy, all of these things are actually bad for us. And we need to go back to primitive pre-industrial energy sources of wind and solar. Just go back to being pre-industrial societies. All of these things are being promoted at universities. And increasingly, more and more people are beginning to realize this is nonsense. And so people don't read what professors write. People don't care. And people are getting out to the real world thanks to the internet and finding useful information. You can learn whatever you want on the internet for free or for very close to free. So for me, I left my university job. I teach at my online university, my online learning platform. I've got 5 online courses. I've had thousands of students from all over the world sign up. I've taught many more students than I would have been able to reach if I was at a university. And I charge them a fraction of what they would pay for the university. And I obviously make more by teaching many more of these students. So I think the future is moving away from these institutions of credentialism and these kind of anointed priests that talk down to us and inform us what we need to do. Whether you look and people arrive at these conclusions from all kinds of different ways. People who have looked at the topic of diet and nutrition realize that there's something extremely wrong with nutrition departments at universities that are out there telling people to eat garbage, essentially, and telling them to keep eating the same garbage that is making populations extremely unhealthy. There's something clearly wrong with the economists that are out there telling you that, yeah, what we need is more government money printing in order for us to fix the consequences of money printing. And so from various fields, people are arriving at the same conclusion. And I think that the importance of the university is becoming less and less and less. And for me, I'm not interested in reforming the university system. I'm not interested in debating university professors. The university professors themselves, of course, are also not interested in debate. They are not. Effectively, the way to succeed as a university professor is not to be part of any kind of intellectual, any honest intellectual pursuit or any attempt to try and arrive at truth. The way you succeed as a professor, the way you make it to the top, the way you become the recognized authority is to toe the party line, churn out unreadable garbage papers that nobody reads, but that arrive at the same conclusions that everybody wants. And so there's very little interest in engaging with this. So very few people from academia have attempted to critique any of my work, even though, my book, The Bitcoin Standard, might be the economics book that has the highest number of ratings and reviews on Amazon. So it's got something like 6,500 reviews, which is, I've looked around. There might be a few other economics books. Obviously, in business, you have a lot of books that have a lot more, how to make money and those things. Obviously, these will outsell this. But you would imagine if my book was, if these people were interested in honest intellectual debate, they'd want to take on this book that is achieving this high level of popularity and try and argue with it, try and debunk it, try and embarrass it, try and show the world that I am a crank. But there's very little interest in it. There's very little interest in honest intellectual debate, and that's fine. I love that quote by Buckminster Fuller that you don't destroy something by arguing with it. I forget the exact quote, but you replace something by building something better. So I'm not interested in arguing. I'm interested in just writing to readers. I'm not interested in getting jobs at prestigious universities and winning awards and any of that nonsense. I like to write for readers, and I like to I'd like to teach students directly. And so, that's sort of an answer to a small part of your question, which is why about the universities. But do you want me to get into the topic of the book?
It's a shame about university because I had an amazing experience. I went to MIT and I got to learn all these great engineering concepts and fluid dynamics, and I took some finance courses at the Sloan School. And for me,
what kind of engineering did you do?
Mechanical engineering. So
I did mechanical engineering too.
Oh, there you go. Great minds, right? But I still remember learning thermodynamics and fluid dynamics and, from some of these amazing professors. And I lived in a fraternity house with a bunch of guys, and, there was no agendas being pushed back then, or at least at MIT. So I got out and I felt like I had really been learning in a place, it's engineering too at the end of the day, so you can't really divert it too much. And so it's a shame that people can't get that experience these days, but maybe you can't anymore in a university,
Yeah, but you can do it online, and I think this is really why the reason the university is becoming more and more unhinged in a sense is because it's becoming more and more exposed, and so it's difficult to maintain the standards narratives, and so people switch away from them. But you can learn whatever you want online, so. It's kids today have it much better than we did because they can learn anything online almost for free. For instance, look at the example of Saylor University, Michael Saylor, of Bitcoin fame. He's got, I think 50 years from now, Michael Saylor will likely be remembered more for his website, saylor.org, which I believe is an absolutely amazing website, which is a university, essentially an online university that offers university courses for free for anybody in the world. And if you pay a small fee for somebody to proctor you can get a degree. And this essentially allows people to get a degree for a tiny fraction of the price of a regular university by utilizing online education. So it's if the goal of the university is in terms of education, I think people today have a much better deal than we did.
To continue watching the rest of the episode for free, Visit our website, londonreal.tv, or click the link in the description below.
So Jim Rickards has just recorded a video that's not available to anyone in the public, and he's going to be talking about how this upcoming recession is going to be fast, it's going to be bloody, it's going to be nasty. But at the same time, he's going to show you how you can position yourself to profit from all of this chaos. Now, we've made this video only available to our viewers. Go to londonreal.tv/Jim. Watch that immediately. I can't say enough good things about Jim Rickards. He understands the global economic system better than any guest I've ever had on London Real. His predictions are almost uncannily true, and you can learn how to profit from his vision, from his expertise, and his understanding of economics. So go to londonreal.tv/Jim or click the link below. It's an excellent, excellent look on what's going to happen in the future and how you can position yourself to profit from that. Jim is one of the best in the business, one of my favorite guests on London Real. And he's very, very good at predicting the future and showing us all to profit from it. So click the link, and I hope you enjoy. I'm looking for partners, collaborators, colleagues who want to join forces with me around the globe and create real value, generational wealth, and financial freedom for everyone else around the world. Get involved in the cryptocurrency markets, get involved in the NFT markets. This is your moment. Life all comes down to a few moments. Don't let this pass. Now it's not too late. Next year's going to be too late. Ultimately, this is about freedom. That's the way I see it. This is about giving power back to the people and enabling billions of people worldwide to use the financial markets to improve their lives and those of their friends and their families and their communities. Honestly, I think it's a violation of human rights not to allow people basic access to financial services. Because right now people are being kept in the dark, they're being robbed of education, and it's a travesty. And so I'm looking for people that want to join me and be a part of this solution. And that all happens inside the DeFi Academy. The gains my students are making are absolutely amazing. Double, triple digit gains in the first month alone. That's amazing. This will change your life. Now is the time to get involved. I'm going to tell you exactly how my students in my academy made money in the last 30 days. I'm talking about real trading results. And let me just whet your appetite a little bit. Let me hit you with some numbers. I'm talking Brendan from New Zealand is up 68.77% on the month. Steve from Europe up 83%. Albert in Singapore up 169.9% on one single trade. I got Susan up 153% on her call options alone, also rocking 139% returns and 442% returns as well on individual trades. These are people that are changing their financial future in the last 30 days, but it's based on trading discipline. I've graduated over 500 students from inside my academy from over 54 countries around the world. It's amazing. When it comes to crypto, DeFi, and blockchain, we love this space. We truly believe it's the future. This is down to our core. It's authentic to what we're doing, and everybody can tell through the camera because you can't make this stuff up. If you're watching me now, wherever you are, I implore you, take 60 seconds right now and join my academy. Apply today. Now you've got a chance. Life all comes down to a few moments. What are you going to do? What's the choice that you're going to make?